Hey there, fellowship family. Welcome to your one-stop shop for all things church life. I'm Mark Francis, once again your host for today. I'm excited to have my good friend Rose Lauck with us, a co-host, a person who has been on Sermon Spotlight episodes.
I've never been on
well.
this one, I don't think.
You've
Have
been.
I?
We've talked worship with Mike Lukens before.
Gotcha.
So give us your official job title here at Fellowship Bible Church.
My official job title is Production Manager and Creative Designer.
And we're going to focus on the creative designer component of things today.
Yeah,
and
great.
We are entering the Christmas season here the day after Thanksgiving. And so a lot of people turn the page of, shopping and Black Friday and things like that. It also launches Advent, an Advent season, right? And
Yes.
so off the top of your head, give us what Advent season means to you.
Well, Advent, of course, is from Latin, which means the coming or the arrival. So it's just a time to prepare, just like Lent is a time to prepare for the celebration of Easter. Advent is a time to prepare for the celebration of the incarnation.
Mm-hmm. And so as we do that, we get the whole month, or at least a good 24 days or so to prepare. And this season, it falls on this first weekend of December, and it goes all the way through. And we have Christmas Eve on a Tuesday this year, where we have Christmas Eve services. We'll get a chance to celebrate. But what can we do as a church? What can we do as families to further assist our preparation? Right?
Well, I think the reason Advent ends up being so important is partially a cultural one and partially a traditional one. So the church itself developed the traditions around Advent, and our worship team read this really great book together recently that talked about the importance of festivals and seasons and times in our calendars. Because if we didn't have Christmas to really focus on Christ becoming a man, the incarnation, which carne from flesh, like carnivore, right? If we didn't have this season built into our natural rhythm of life, would we talk so much about Christ becoming a man? Now, we're in this Christology series, so it's important to us right now, but on a normal rhythm of life, would we do that? So I think Advent is important, and I think because Christmas is so important in our culture, and our children are doing Christmas programs at school, and there's Christmas songs, and you go in the stores and there's Christmas decorations, and because it's a Christ-focused holiday, the world can try to steal that, but the fact that the culture acknowledges this holiday, it's just an opportunity for us to really embrace our Christianity and to bring it into our homes.
And it's funny because we are a people who need to be reminded.
Right.
God knew that. God knows that about us. I mean, even from the initial creation of how he then declared to be a day of rest, and how we look at that model and how we need to gather on a regular routine. And even just in our own American culture and tradition, we have 4th of July. We have other celebrations that we use to remember things, whether it be Veterans Day or Memorial Day. And we get a chance in our Christian church calendar to remember two big things, obviously, but we should be remembering more probably on a regular basis. But you look at...
Yeah, well, and I think the traditional, if we want to talk about that a little bit, the traditional liturgical calendars do that, right? So there's readings for the Sunday after this, and there's readings for Epiphany, and there's like a traditional liturgical church does that. I think we rebel against that slightly because of the traditionalism that it becomes and kind of the rote speaking it can become. My husband grew up Lutheran, and he was we were talking about the Nicene Creed recently, and he was talking about how when we've been reciting it in the worship services, and that brings him back to his child. Immediately he reverts back to his childhood and saying those creeds in his childhood. But what we were talking about is how much more meaningful they are to him now than they were when he was a child, just saying them by rote. And I think that's true. I've talked about it on these podcasts before. I'm a classical educator. I believe in classical education strongly. And part of classical education is you do teach young children by rote. So I do think there's a really important thing that happens there. But I think we rebel against it, partly because of our American independent culture, right? Where we don't want to say the same things all the time. We want to be more creative than that in a sense.
But that's where the creative arts comes into play.
Creativity
right?
around those ideas.
If you keep doing the same thing rote year after year, day after day, you'll get pretty bored and tired of it. And it's funny that you look at having a traditional calendar like Advent, or like celebrating Easter, or like celebrating communion in a worship service, or whatever it might be, can get quote unquote boring or traditional, or just you kind of can glaze over, have your eyes glaze over things. So what the creative arts can do is provide an opportunity to bring the same story to your own heart and mind in a fresh way.
Yeah, and it's not just your heart and mind. Mark, this past Sunday, Mark's sermon talked so much about creativity and how Jesus is the ultimate creator, and all of those things are true. And he also created each one of us to be part of a church body. That came out in our service last Sunday as well. And so I have these thoughts about creativity and how God brings a body of believers together to this time in this space. And he has things that he knows will help this body of believers grow to be more like Christ. And so in my mind, the creative arts that come out by the movement of the Holy Spirit in us are the arts that are going to encourage the others in our scope of influence to grow. So, I mean, sure, we did this Advent devotional, and that's what we're really here to talk about. And if you open your Christian book sellers, flyers, you're going to see 150 Advent devotionals, right? So why do we need another Advent devotional? And to me, it speaks to that idea that I'm talking about, that God has brought together this body of believers at this specific time and place with this specific giftedness. And so we have a call to encourage, Hebrews tells us, to spur one another on to love and good deeds. Do not forsake assembling together, so that you may encourage one another. And so to me, using the creativity that God has put inside of us in the context of this local body is something that we're called to do.
And the creative arts can be very broad. It doesn't have to be defined as just singing or music or looking at a piece of art. So give us your background and history of why creative arts is such a passion of yours, and how do you define it?
So I've been thinking about this actual question a lot, because I've been thinking about my role here and what I do, and what is it that God has placed in me, that the passions and the unique giftings, and where did all of those things come from? And I'll tell this really quick story about when I was, I want to say 10, 11, 12 years old. I had a cousin, she was my second cousin, and I started to write poetry, and it was so bad. It was terrible poetry. It was your typical, 4/4 rhyming, like elementary school, not even good elementary school poetry. But I had this cousin who had these journals, and at the time, journals weren't so popular, right? This is in the 70s. Now everybody's got a journal, and you can buy 1 million of them. But she had this specific journal that she called her poetry journal, and she had written all these poems. And so she saw what I was doing, and she gifted me with this journal, and I wrote poetry. I wrote a lot of poetry. And I was even thinking, like, I remember they used to put poems on the back of the church bulletin, and I can still remember I wrote this little poem for Christmas, and it went like this. It was, "Happy birthday, Jesus. How old are you today?" And then it was Jesus answering, "I'm older than the forests and the fields of golden hay." And then, like, the next verse was, "Did you play as a boy like my brother and I?" And then it was Jesus answering. He said, "Yes, my daughter, I'd swing from the treetops on high." And it had tons of verses. It was like this really long poem, and they put it on the back of the church bulletin, and I was so proud and so excited. And so I think from the youngest age, God put in my heart this love of creating, of language, and it's been a little crazy around here. We're trying to get the building decorated. And
which, by the way, when you show up this weekend, you are going to see some really cool things.
We went a little crazy. Yeah. And so I'm literally making string balls and string stars in the middle of the night. And I'm doing it, and it's nothing to me. Like, it's easy. And some people come and they want to help, and I try to show them how to help, and it's really hard and challenging for them. And it's hard for me to understand because it's so easy for me. But I think I remember doing those things with my mother. I remember doing those things with my parents. I fell in love with music at a really young age. I've played the piano my whole life, and I will play the piano until the Lord takes the ability away from me somehow. I did go to Shenandoah school, and I did I majored in piano for a while. I actually finished my degree in history because I have an interest there as well. But I just think God puts in some of our hearts. All of our hearts, right? We all have our own giftings. We're eyes and ears and hands and feet, whatever God calls us to be. And God has called me to be whatever this is.
And this past weekend, Mark Carey caught himself in his beginning of the sermon saying that he doesn't have a creative bone in his body.
Yeah,
but we
that's
know
a lie.
that's not true, first of all.
That's a
But
lie.
second of all, he did then elaborate to say that God has created each one of us with some sort of creative bone.
Yeah.
And it calls us to then a heart of thankfulness and a heart of worship as a response to what he's done for us.
Well, and I read a lot of books about creativity, and I read a lot of books about art. And I haven't read this book yet, and I can't even remember the title off the top of my head. I heard a podcast about the book, and the podcast talks about how a lot of creativity is problem solving, and that's the way I look at it. Like, and if you ever talk to anybody who's come in here and tried to, I'll put in air quotes, help me with one of my projects, sometimes they're really frustrated because literally, you've seen it, Mark. Like even Mark will come in and he'll be like, "Hey, how can I help you?" And I'll be standing there looking at something, and
It's
I'm
tough
like,
to get an answer sometimes.
Well, it's not just tough to get an answer. Well, because I'm standing there looking at something, and I'm like, well, I'm just not sure how I'm going to do this. And, and then I'll banter back and forth about it. And then I'll go find some piece of string or some piece of scissors, or I'll remember something I have in storage, and I'll go back and get it. Because a big part of creative is problem solving. Mm-hmm. So if you fix a car, if you can go out and if you can open the car lid and look at the engine of the car and figure out what's wrong with that car and figure out what tools you need to put the car back together, you are a creative person. And I think that that's really important for us to help everybody understand.
I have in-laws who are accountants. You would think that's the stereotype of somebody who's not creative, but they're problem solving. If you look at it from that way, people in that kind of job environment are solving problems to help people with taxes and returns and money and things like that.
Right.
So everybody's gifted in different ways,
Yeah,
but
and you
everybody
don't
has
see that so much in the animal kingdom. So that's why, like Mark was talking about in his sermon, about we are we are uniquely made. We are made in the image of Christ and made in the image of God. And part of that is our creative ability. Now, I know that they'll say, well, the monkey can figure out how to get the coconut down from the tree. But I think that that's a little more instinct. The monkey is not decorating for the beauty of decorating, right? So there's these transcendentals, they call them truth, beauty, and goodness. And so art itself has truth, beauty, and goodness. And I still will argue with you all day long that fixing my car, which sounds terrible, meets those standards of truth, beauty, and goodness. Because the car is either working or it's not. Helping me is good. Mm-hmm. Me being able to get where I need to go is good, right? And a car that is put together properly, a machine that works that well, is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So fixing a car meets those standards, and I think creativity has a lot to do with those kinds of standards.
Let's merge these two conversations together.
Okay, sorry.
So we have
I told
the
you
Advent.
we could go on all
no,
day.
This is
Sorry.
Great. So we have the Advent conversation that we know that we're called to remember, and we're called to reflect and anticipate the Christmas season and the Christmas holiday of Christ's birth. And yet, how can we do that creatively? So God was able to assemble a bunch of people from FBC to put together an amazing devotional. Mm-hmm. So give
really
us
great.
The background story of how that
Okay,
came to be.
The background story of the devotional is that I get really bored in the summer sometimes. And so the really long backstory is that I wrote a poem for the Good Friday services, not this past year, not 2024, 2023. Mm-hmm. I wrote a poem, and the intention of the poem was to give people the same sensation that the Israelites would have experienced during waiting for the Messiah. So the poem is kind of, it doesn't have resolution. It's kind of asking, will the Messiah ever come? Like, it was meant to create that kind of tension. It was not meant to create resolution. Well, the poem got cut from the Good Friday service. I felt like the poem was one of my better ones and had a lot of strength. And so I put it aside and I wrote a poem. Oh my gosh, I don't remember this worship service. Do you remember the whole "We Made the Town Disappear" worship service, what year that was?
Oh, at least 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, I wrote a poem for that service as well. And so I decided when my poem got cut from the Good Friday service, in that moment I thought, you know what, I really just need to do a book of poetry. And I know that Gilbert Gomez writes a lot of poetry. I don't know who else in our body writes poetry. But I thought, you know what? I have several poems I could use. What if we do a call to the artists of our body and we do a devotional for Advent that has readings, poems, artwork? I have these books I pull out at Advent. I only pull them out at Christmas time. I have them in storage. And these books are beautiful. And each book has songs in it. It has, like, it'll have The Christmas Story or The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, if you guys know any of those stories. And it'll have artwork as well. And so I thought, what if we do something like that at Fellowship Bible Church using the talents and abilities that we have here? So that's where the idea came from. And I started about July, I think, June, July. I don't remember the exact date, but I basically did an all call. I used a couple different ways to communicate the call. And then I was amazed. Let me tell you what, there are some amazing people that go to this church. I met a lady who has a doctorate in flute performance and just donated all of her flutes to the Smithsonian. And she goes here to church, so there's some really interesting people. And there's some really great devotionals in here.
So as you started to make the call, you started to get some responses. And what was the general take on the content of what was submitted, and how did that get curated?
So I curated it all myself, and I just trusted the Lord with that. So there are a lot of ways to approach Advent. Traditional way to approach Advent, and Marcia Richards will have to forgive me because Marcia Richards is an incredible Advent expert. She does she submitted a lot of the devotions. She actually does a daily devotion during the month of December. She has subscribers to it and the whole thing. So Marcia had a lot of helpful information for me. So she knows the exact order, but traditionally the 4 weeks of Advent inside the church, the worship time has a focus. I think it's love, joy, peace, and hope. But I think you'll see lists with different orders and things. But I'm not a traditionalist. That's part of my creative, slightly rebellious bent. So I just said, okay, what's God going to do? And so God started doing some really cool stuff. To tell you all the stories, here's just a story, an aside. So I'm finishing up the devotion, this book, and I wrote all of the worship services. So there's 4 family worship services in there. They're nothing fancy. But I was working through them, and I was looking at the poems that had been submitted. I was looking at everything that had been submitted, and I wanted to do one on redemption. And that Sunday, Mark Carey preached a sermon on redemption. So part of it was seeing that Mark was going to be doing this Christology series this year as well. I knew that at the time I developed the devotional idea. I thought that it would tie in really well. And so there are things in here that are reviews of some of the things that Mark said, because literally I was like, okay, this has to get done. I kind of know what I want to say, but it's sloppy and not well written. And then Mark preached his sermon, and it just totally solidified everything and brought it all together. So that's kind of the backstory of the whole thing and how it came about.
And so there's themes as you go throughout the book as well.
Yeah, so the book is divided. I can just real quick. Yep. The book is divided into 4 sections, and each section could actually be published as its own pamphlet or something, because what I did was I took 4 pieces of art that were created by people in our congregation. So the first section, Mike Lukens did a trip on his sabbatical out west and took a whole bunch of beautiful photographs. So the first section of the devotional, we use one of Mike's photographs as our core, and we focus on Jesus as the creator, as God. And then the second section, Sherry Libby, who is she's on staff here. She's one of our administrative assistants. Sherry painted this lovely candle on a canvas. So the second section, I used Sherry's candle, and it's more black and white because see what God does. The second section, the thematic material is separation, longing, and hope. Mm-hmm. And so the single candle, the black and white kind of feel for the second section. The third section, there's a wonderful family that can't attend our services very much because they're caretaking elderly parents. But she painted this beautiful acrylic of the Nativity. Her name is Allison. And so the third section is titled In the Fullness of Time, and it has Allison's painting as kind of the artwork hook. And then the fourth section is Glory to God in the Highest. And Jennifer Walker, who's another delightful artist we have here, I needed one more piece. And so I saw Jennifer on Sunday morning. I was like, Jennifer, I need something for this devotional, Son of God, Son of Man. And she sends me later that day this beautiful pencil work. And it's just a perfect conclusion because it shows the birth and the ascension. It is incredibly beautiful pencil work. It's the last section of the devotional. So each section has its own artistic hook. Each section has a song. So for the first section, I wrote a song, which is it really came together really well. God was very good to me. The second section is O Come, O Come Emmanuel, which is in public domain. Mm-hmm. The third section is that's the section that's kind of our print problem. We actually put a song in there called In the Fullness of Time, which was created by artists who are currently still recording. So we did have to pay them for permission to reprint their work. And then the fourth section, there's a very old Charles Wesley hymn that we never sing. It's called Glory to God in the Highest, and so it's the hymn in the fourth section. So each section has its own. But here's the cool part. Did you catch that? It's the gospel. So the first candle lighting is about Jesus, God the Creator. The second candle lighting is about our separation and our longing and hope for Messiah. The third section is about in the fullness of time, Mary gave birth to that son. And then the fourth section is glory to God in the highest, the future. So I took the idea of the Advent candles and I surrounded them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so it is kind of it could be an evangelistic tool.
Yeah. Again, going back to a creative component of not doing the same thing year after year, it still is telling the common, similar stories, the gospel message, the gospel story in a fresh way. And it allows families to interact with one another on a regular basis. So bring in kind of the perspective of how you see families using this.
Oh, well, I think I believe so strongly, again, I've been on these podcasts, you've got everybody who listens has heard me talk about it. I believe so strongly in multi-generational worship. Kids love crafts. Kids love to keep their hands busy. Part of this devotional, part of what's important to me is things aren't long, right? So you can read the poems in 5 minutes and then you can go back and read the poems again. The devotionals I tried to keep to 500 words and less. So they're short. So the idea is that you can read these devotionals every day with your family. Then there's 6 of them, right? Because there's really only 24 days, right, in December. So basically there's December 1st, December 2nd, December 3rd, December 4th, December 5th, December 6th. That's the first section. Right in the middle is a family worship service, which in the ideal world would happen on Sunday. Because December 1st, we never know what day that's going to be, right? Right. So that family worship you would stick on Sunday. And it is literally, there's a little teaching. I can just give you the first family worship. It starts with in the beginning. And they all start with questions because I believe that that's how we learn. And this says, can you think of things that have a beginning? I'll ask you, Mark, can you think of things that have a beginning?
I think everything has a beginning.
Like what?
Yeah, a tree.
A tree has a beginning? Okay, or a story or a movie?
A movie,
okay.
That's good.
Can something be before the beginning?
Wow, now we're getting deep. I mean, there's possibilities of that.
So,
here's... I instantly think of God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So I'm thinking biblical, spiritual right
well,
away.
I threw some things like an idea. So before there can be a movie, there has to be an idea, right? Before there can be day, there has to be night,
Before my tree, there has to be a seed.
Before the tree, there has to be a seed, right?
Okay.
And then I say read Genesis 1:1 because it starts in the beginning. And then I say read John 1:1 How are they alike? And how are they different? So that's like just a sample of like the teaching in the first one, and then there's just some scriptures to read while you light the Advent, and then there's a couple songs that you might sing with your family when you're doing that devotional. So that's kind of how they roll. Yeah, it's
great.
It's fun.
So, give us a sample.
Okay.
If there is one of
Well, I said I would read one of my poems, and I'll read this one because it has to be read, and there's a backstory. Poetry always has a backstory, and you have to really be willing to explore it to find it. So hopefully this isn't too hard to explore. But the backstory of this poem, the title of the poem is "The Aurora Borealis Declare Light and Life to the Waiting Crowd." And the backstory is that Mike Lukens went up on Skyline Drive to see the Aurora Borealis, right? And he told this story about how there were all these people nearby. And when the Aurora Borealis appeared, there was like this collective gasp from the crowd. And this one woman like was all moved and like she never thought she'd see it. And she started to cry and all those things. And the whole thing made me feel a little sad, as I often do, because is she crying because she's experienced the greatness of nature? Or is she crying because she's been called to be closer to God? And in our world, we tend to communicate as the greatness of nature. So this poem is about, hopefully you'll catch it, but this poem is about that story and about how men would say that just happened by, the Aurora Borealis just happened by accident, but how we know the truth. And how much greater the incarnation is than the sight of the Aurora Borealis. That's what this poem is about.
Love
okay,
it.
You ready?
Yeah.
Here it goes. Silence, stillness, a quiet giggle as the peaceful mob awaits the mute spectacle of luminosity grand. Darkness sits over unseen bodies of fair-skinned, idle figures, suspended in eternal moments of waiting, breathless. Paint appears unannounced, triumphant, eclipse overshadows. Still winds of electromagnetism, gale force, auroras travel courses unseen. Power produced through destructive unity of particles, invisible waves arrive at perfect receptors inside eyes expectant. Origins unknown and unlikely, accidents manufacturing patterns, chaotic beauty forged by limited minds conceived after kind, impossible. Lips from eternity, authoritarian words composing worlds, effortless organization of nothing, formless oceans emerge, energy limited. Opus magnum, invention incredible, words of Genesis, definitive nativity creator descends to humble form, bringing incandescence incomprehensible. Sighs, involuntary explosions, effortless sensation of forces overwhelming, skies declaring glory greater, word and light come.
Awesome.
So that's the Aurora Borealis.
But isn't God cool? I mean,
Yeah.
God is cool where he just can present that to us and display his glory.
Right. And then just the idea that like it just I've told this story recently a couple of times, Mark. I've said that if I had my dream job, it would be to produce the fireworks show at Epcot, right?
Right. Yes. The laser show.
Because the lasers and the boats in the middle of the thing and all that. Partly because it makes me incredibly sad if you read. They may have changed the show. When I was at Disney about 10 years ago, we went to see that show. And I mean, it was amazing. Everybody's like, you've got to see the show. It's amazing. Take your breath away. Beautiful, incredible, incredibly creative. Everybody's talking the show up. So we're sitting around that lake thing waiting for it to start. And I get on the Disney website. And on the Disney website, you can read the paragraphs about like what the producers are thinking, right? Just like I kind of had to give you some context for that poem in order for you to understand it. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
The creators of the show are giving you what the show is about. It was so humanistic and evolutionary and so not the message that I want my children to believe. And they were with me. So not the message that I believe, but yet here we are all sitting around this lake having that message put in our minds because of how incredibly beautifully done it is. And that is like one of the cries of my heart, is that we as believers, reclaim might be too strong of a word, but we begin to create with excellence things that do what I hope that poem does, that show us it's impossible for the aurora borealis to be made up by accidental electromagnetics. You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't compute.
But to have Christians and the church, yes, either claim or reclaim or produce excellent work that presents the glories of God to the world around us, is part of our job and our role and our calling as believers, to display that glory and to present that. Yes, during an Advent season like this, but each and every week, which is why there is that work and that effort to put on a fresh, creative worship service to allow people to see the glories of God, which allows us to decorate a building, to have it just represent something that is going to be inviting for people to see the God's glory when they come to church on any given weekend here in the Christmas season.
And it's really interesting to me. I would think that as I get older, I would get more tired and I would have less of a passion about it. But what I'm discovering is the older I get, the more passionate I am about just the excellence and the creativity and the beauty and the truth and the goodness in this world. And show me, God, like just show me, Lord, what it is you want to say about yourself. And then I will put my hands and my mind and my heart about those things. So So
we have booklets, and they're going to continue to be at the home center each and every week.
There's 100 more that will be printed in-house. But there's a QR code coming out this Friday that you can get your own and print your own. We will remove that one piece of art that was not created in our house limits how much printing we can do. For the booklet that's coming out on the QR code, that will be removed. There will be a link that you can still access that work. You will just access it through a link inside the digital copy.
So even after this episode gets released and posted, we'll come back, and when that link is ready to go, we'll insert it so you guys can have it in the show notes, but also just to be able to pass on to any of your friends.
Yeah, and what we're going to do, we're really excited about this. They're going to actually give it away at Follow the Star. Yeah. So they're going to have that QR code available in the cookie tent. So as people come through that event, they'll be able to scan that QR code and they'll get a free copy of this devotional as well. Awesome. So we're very excited that God is going to use it in that way. When I come up with ideas like this in July, I never know. I just know that God told me to do it. And I have bosses, right? So I went to Mike Lukens. I was like, Mike, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? I feel like God told me to do it. And right at that time, he said something in another meeting to the effect of, if God is telling you to do something and you're not doing it, that's not right. Yeah. And I was like, well, God is telling me to do this, so I'm going to do it. And maybe 2 people will read it. Maybe 5 people will read it. Maybe I'll be up all night writing devotionals because nobody submits. There's some cool stuff in here, guys. Let me just throw this one shout out to Christy Vocal. She studies God's word. So there's a psalm in here that Christy wrote. She took the names from the genealogy of Christ and she turned them into a psalm of praise. And it is so cool. And there's lots of poems from lots of people, lots of writings. Everybody did it's really great.
Well, we appreciate you being here, championing the arts. And again, we have just an amazing opportunity to celebrate God and worship him through this booklet, but then beyond. And obviously we have Christmas Eve services coming up, where if you haven't been to a Christmas Eve service at FBC, it's a neat, fun, creative story that will seem to hopefully impact you as you attend in a way that will draw you into a deeper relationship with the Lord.
We don't want to give away too many secrets here.
So I'm parsing my words carefully here. But again, if you've never been, I would just encourage you to look out for those times of either 11, 5, 7 o'clock to attend. 11 o'clock, we'll have children's ministry and childcare for you for that purpose as well. So put that on your calendar, and I'm excited about this Advent season. And thanks for sharing.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for just being willing to share your gifts and talents with the church, and then impart them to others.
Yeah.
So,
If anybody ever wants to come do something creative, I tell people that Mark will tell you, I can always find something for you to do. So if you're sitting at home and you're like, I don't have anything to do, call me.
Yep.
Because I've always
There's
got,
always
there you
things
go.
to be done
There's always a
around
project.
here. Uh-huh.
There's always volunteer opportunities. There's always, I don't know.
Yep. Well, thanks for being here. I'm excited again for this coming Christmas season. And for you guys watching and listening, go grab one of those booklets, utilize it at home, and pass it to others around you. So, wow. All right. We have a lot more to get to the rest of this coming season. I'm excited about more testimonies, more stories. If you'd like to share yours as well, reach out to us, fbcva.org/podcasts, and submit your information to us. Well, as we prepare for this Christmas season, again, let's just continue to let Christ be the focus of our lives each and every day.